Okay, very, very quickly here. I'm not going to spend any time on this. My background is in front of you. You know, Kenny made mention of the fact that I guess he's been doing this for almost 50 years. Well, guess what? I've been in the home inspection business almost 50 years at this point. I think it's maybe this year, next year, I lost track, but about 50 years that I've been in it. I have licenses as a home inspector in multiple states, multiple code enforcement licenses, on and on. You can see my background here. I do a lot of these presentations throughout the country, IW, several chapters. And I've been training home inspectors for probably almost 40 years, I guess, at this point. You want to get in touch with me, my contact information is here for you. You're welcome to reach out to me. More than happy to get back to you. There's only a few of you, and you know who you are, that I probably would not call back, but the rest of you, I would be happy to do so. So let's go ahead and discuss. The ASHI standards require us to inspect the roof. And then you have to describe things. So you got to describe the roof material and the method that you use to inspect the roof. Well, inspecting the method that you use to inspect the roof, I would call that really the very easy part. Did you walk it? Use a ladder and get up to it? Did you, at the gutter, did you use a pair of binoculars? Nowadays, a lot of people are using drones, things like that. If you're going to use a drone, by the way, the only thing I would definitely suggest, please make sure that you have the the FAA Part 107 license. Otherwise, you are absolutely in violation of federal law. All right, excuse me, roof classifications. Generally speaking, you have two types of classifications, low slope and steep slope. Low slope roofing, and I'm going to show you a chart in a moment, give you a little bit better idea. Low slope roofing, of course, includes the water impermeable, they're supposed to be weatherproof, but typically speaking, it's anything that is equal to or less than 3 and 12. And then steep slope are those that are exceeding 3 and 12. So I'll show you that in a different way. Looks like this. Very, very simple. You have anything that is over 3 and 12. In other words, 4 and up, 4 and 12 and up is steep slope. 2 and 12 to upwards of 4 and 12 is considered low slope. Anything below that is considered flat. Hollis asked me to talk about low slope roofing. So that's kind of, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a little bit of flat roofing material, but you have 5 generic classifications of what is considered low slope roofing. You have built up roof membranes, metal panels, you have all sorts of polymer modified bitumen membranes, you have a ton of single ply membranes that goes anywhere from the gamut of PVC and TPOs, which are considered a subset as thermoplastics. And then many of you probably come across EPDMs, fair amount. And sometimes you'll even see EPDMs on residential settings as well. But those are thermostat membranes. And then you have the other classification, which are the spray foam based, SPFs. Just to do it in a slightly kind of different perspective, steep slope, you have 6 generic types: asphalt, clay and concrete, metal, slate, wood shakes and shingles, and then some of the synthetics. When we talk about steep slope, they're composed of typically individual pieces or components that are installed in a shingle fashion. And the steep slope assemblies have three primary parts. So I'm just doing this at the moment with you simply for kind of background purposes, if you will, so that you'll understand the basic differences here. So with steep slope assemblies, you've got the roof deck, whatever kind of substrate we're talking about, the underlayment, and the roof covering. Again, when we get into talking about some of these tons and tons, dozens of manufacturers, types of roofs, lots of different construction techniques, and hopefully during the process of your doing the inspection, of course, you hope that the roof was done even according to manufacturer specs. So we need to have some basic understanding of construction just to be able to do this, which hopefully you all have. I found this chart. Hopefully you're able to see it. And it's kind of a breakdown of what we just talked about. And if you look over to the left side of this, when we talk about the two types of roofing systems, on the left side, you have that little kind of itty bitty steep roofing. And then you get to the low slope and you see how this just keeps branching out more and more. I also thought this might be interesting for you. When it comes to low slope roofing, I found this pie chart give you a general idea of some of the kind of makeup, if you will, the percentage of the different types of roofings that are going on. Far and wide, you will see over 50% is made up, about a quarter is built up roofing, the BURs. And then you have that full gamut of single ply membranes at 34%, so slightly over a third of all the roofing. And then you kind of have everything else.
Dave, is that accurate on built-up roofing? I mean, is this up to date? I mean, we don't see much built-up roofing anymore.
Well, this is over time. This is not necessarily what's out there today, but believe it or not, there is still, when you talk about built-up roofing, it was relatively wide on, obviously on commercial, but I gotta, for those of you who have been doing inspections for a long time, think about all the built-up roofs you saw even on residential. So it was a big classification. The roofs are still out there. This doesn't mean it's what's being put on necessarily today, but it's what was out there of all these different types. And they're switching over. At this point, if you have a built-up roof, my guess is it's being replaced at the very least, probably by some kind of single ply membrane. And even the next one beyond that, modified bitumens that are out there, they are gaining a lot in popularity.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
What's a puff roof?
That's the spray foam, the polyurethane foam.
Okay, like Eufy?
Yeah, we'll call it that.
Okay.
Now, Sean, I don't know if you know this one, and I hate to say Kenny and Hollis, but no, it's not Puff the Magic Dragon. Wow, no reaction to that one. Okay.
I believe that's spelled with two F's.
Wow.
We're all laughing behind our muted microphones, Dave. Don't worry.
Well, that's okay. We won't talk about the reference to what Puff the Magic Dragon was either. Anyway, moving right along. Hollis, if you would for me, please. I'm not sure if there are some questions that I'm sort of seeing into the chat, but I'm going to let you monitor that for me if you would.
Yeah, Sean's on top of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Built-up roof membranes, again, we refer to them as BURs or BURs. They've been around for easily 100-odd years. Those are the ones that you commonly will see that are essentially tar and gravel roofs. So you have alternate layers of a bitumen that's on there, and then and that has a reinforcing fabric. And then they go ahead and they put gravel on there. And the gravel, more than anything else, is, among other things, to help with the weather effects, ultraviolet, so it retards the effects of the sun beating down on it. With a built-up roof, you look at, if you wanted to figure out the number of plies that you have, and we talk about such as like a 3-ply or a 4-ply roof, when you hear that term, you're talking about as a 4-ply, it's a 4-ply roof membrane that is on there. And this is probably the best way to explain it to you. So these membranes are 36 inches wide. You have an overlap. And you'll see about a 2-inch overlap at the edges. But other than that, do the simple math. Whatever the exposure is, like a 9-inch exposure, do the math and divide 9 into 36. And there's your number. So in other words, when you do that, you're talking about, as an example, a 4-ply roof. Or if I had, 12-inch exposure, I've got a 3-ply and so on. And that's really all it is. So when they put it on it, it's a almost like a base layer of felt that's going on there, sort of like tar paper, hot asphalt going over top of that. And then they do a flood coat of the asphalt. And while that's being put on there and it's still warm, they put gravel on top of that. Some of these have a base sheet. That's the bottommost layer that's going to be on there, typically mechanically fastened.
Hey, Dave,
Yes,
how can you see the number of plies if they're under the gravel?
good question. The easy answer to that is you can't. That's the simple answer. So the best thing I can tell you when you're inspecting one of these, I wouldn't even attempt to tell somebody, not being able to see it, I would not even make an attempt to say to anybody in the course of an inspection, you have a 2-ply, 3, 4-ply, whatever it might be. I would not infer that you have any, how many plies are on the roof.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, if it's applied directly to the roof, it's considered a fully adhered roof. Again, those reinforcing fabrics are also called roofing felts or ply sheets. So they're reinforced with glass fiber mats or, for the most part, organic mats. And I said to you before, the standard width is a 36-inch width. We really don't see, at least I would tell you in all the years that I've been doing this and all the places around the country that I've done inspections, I can't say that I've ever seen the metric ones used. With this, the bitumen that they typically use is either asphalt, coal tar, or it's a cold applied adhesive. If you've ever had the displeasure of driving down the road and getting behind one of these trucks that has the kettle or the tanker and it's hot, the smell of that. This is not a job that I would ever want. I can't even imagine having that job. But, it's a job. People have to do it. They apply it with either by mop or a mechanical spreader. The asphalt's a petroleum product. Coal tar is derived from distilling coal. And then the cold applied adhesives are just a solvent-based asphalt. And they don't need to be heated at all. not the way the other ones do. The surfacings for this, they put some kind of an aggregate on there that I was talking about before. Usually what goes on there is gravel. And it's actually called slag. They look very much like, they're very sharp, kind of broken up rock or gravel, just like you might have on the side of the road. One of the things that I would tell you, because I know we're going to have limited time tonight, one of the things that I would strongly suggest, if you have one of those roofs, not to walk that roof, because if you did not have a problem with leakage before you were on it, you run every possibility of stepping on some of the gravel and puncturing a hole. So unless there is some kind of essentially a walkway that's been laid up there, I really don't advise that you walk a roof that a built-up roof where you've got the slag on it. But again, you can see some of the different surfacings that they may put on here. And they are hot roofs. When they go on, there are different problems that can be created because of the heat, as an example. Technically speaking, some of these different ones, because they're so hot, they could cause a lot of damage. I had a consulting case. I do a lot of work as an expert, and I had a case that I was doing several years ago, not that long ago, a few years back, where they were re-roofing a high school. And the problem was they put the tar on there, and apparently around one of the internal roof drains that they had tar that they put down the drain as well. And it ended up, they had a torrential downpour, I believe that night or the next, and they had massive flooding in the school as a result. So I got called out there to look to see what had caused it and why it had happened and things like that. And for the most part, I would tell you it was just carelessness on the roofer's part. But there are different precautions that have to be taken. So on these built-up roofs like this, as I said before, you've got the alternating layers of roofing felt, and then you have asphalt or coal tar. The felt itself is really there to help provide strength, especially with regard to thermal movement, the expansion and contraction that you get. Most of the time, these systems are adhered to the top of an insulation layer. You might have that base sheet that I talked about before that would be fastened to the roof deck. These are probably some of the easiest roofs from a maintenance standpoint. The repair materials are very readily available. The roofs hold up fairly well. They definitely do not have, and I'll show you in a moment on another slide, life expectancy is quite a bit less than some of the other materials that are out there. Modified bitumen. So that is gaining in a lot of popularity on that. They put polymers in that, they add that to it so that it makes it more stable, especially at some of the temperature swings. And you have all these different types that could be on there. When you talk about a modified bitumen roof, you have these chemical formulations, which is pretty much what you see in front of you. And the easiest way of saying it, if you really wanted to, is just call it, as an example, SBS or 8PP or so on. Nobody, unless you're playing maybe Trivial Pursuit, if I said SBS, most people have no idea of the chemical formula or the fact that it stands for styrene, butadiene, styrene, or the other one, the atactic, polypropylene, and so on. This stuff is just very, very confusing. And because there's so many different ones that are out there, people just refer to it as a mod bit or a modified bitumen roof and just kind of let it go at that. A lot of versatility to this. Not difficult to repair. They are tough, hold up for a long time. Repairs are either cold repaired or torched down. So it's a very cost-effective type of system. As with almost any of them, some of the big problems come in because of incorrect installation. One of the things on this, because many of these are torch down systems, they do create a potential fire hazard. So when they roll it out, this is kind of what it looks like. And because these are typically torch down systems, every now and then you read in the, well, nobody gets papers anymore, but you hear on the news, you'll see it on the news. Some building was being done and they're actually, and there was a fire. And the reason for that is they're supposed to keep somebody up on the roof for quite an extended time, possibly even overnight, to make sure that the heat dissipates and there's not a fire hazard. But every now and then something happens, and you always hear about these problems occurring. So I was talking about before some of the life expectancies, and this one is going to be based on how many layers and the way it's put down. So some of the numbers that I have here, generally speaking, you're somewhere, maybe depending on the manufacturer, 10 to 15 plus or minus years. When I go back to the built up roofs, those are typically a little bit less. 10 years might be considered a good life on a built up roof. Whereas with a modified, somewhere in that 10 to 15 plus or minus, some of them will give you a 20-year. So there's a lot of different ones that are out there.
Dave, let me interrupt for just a minute. Because of our false start here, what I'd like to do is not have you try to rush or cut things short, which means that you'd actually be going to about 9:50 because you started at 8:50. If we plan for you to go to 9:50, I realize that's inconvenient to some of the people, and I'm going to apologize in advance. But we really do need to stick to the time frame because we're issuing continuing education credits, and the state really has to be able to trust us. So don't try to. So if you could shoot for 9:45, 9:50 as an end time. And once again, I apologize to the people who have to put kids to bed or whatever. Sorry.
My apologies to everybody for having the technical difficulties here. If it makes you all feel better, I have to be on a flight first thing tomorrow morning. So
things happen.
Yeah, I got to be up early anyway. As Kenny said before, I have no problem talking for any length of time that anybody wants to give me. So I've got more than enough material to carry us through for another half hour or so. If anybody feels that I am rushing through this, that was only because I was trying to help with the time. But that being said, please, I guess, send a message through chat if I am going too fast for you. I'm more than happy to back up and make sure that you're getting all the information.
You're doing fine.
All right. Single ply, which again gives you that big, broad range of a lot of different types of single ply membranes. Good portion of those are fully adhered systems. Those are the ones that are either glued in place or they're secured with some kind of adhesive. They're a little bit longer life. Figure about 15 to 20 years. On EPDMs, you can get with some of them about 30 years, although I would tell you Carlisle Roofing, which is one of the big manufacturers, I believe they're only about a 20-year life on their system. So you gotta, I always, if I ever give somebody life expectancies, I always go very, very conservative. I would rather err on the low side than tell somebody, oh yeah, it's a 30-year roof material, and lo and behold, there's so many things that can occur beyond what we can envision. And now they only get 20 years. Well, who are they going to be upset with? They're going to be upset with me because I told them the normal life is 30. Now, let me also state, I would not ever suggest to anybody from a liability standpoint that you ever, on any kind of roofing system, I strongly advise against telling anybody how much remaining life is on any kind of a roof. The moment you do that, you're opening yourself up to liability. You have given somebody essentially like an implied guarantee or warranty. So I do not recommend that you do that whatsoever. That is vastly different than telling somebody the normal life of this kind of material is X number of years. There's a big difference between the two. But again, a lot of these roofs figure, depending on the manufacturer, on the low side, about 15 to 20, and some of them will give you upwards of about 30 years. Single ply, some of the installation methods. Mechanically fastened is one of the big ones. They use fasteners of something on there. And a lot of the fasteners that they use are these like button head nails or screws that have plates on them. If any of you have ever seen, they're plates like this. They're kind of washers of sorts that you'll see. They're a couple of inches in diameter. If you can visually see the plates through the roof membrane, then the chances are it was installed improperly. You should not be able to see those with an EPDM roof, because EPDM is essentially kind of like, rubber roofing. And when you see that, it's usually giving you telling you it's probably stretched way too tight. So we'll go over some EPDM in a little bit. But they put these on and they go down essentially just with the nails or the screws with these plates. Regular shingle nails are not acceptable for these. Mechanically fastened roofs figure a life of about 10 to 15 years. The other type that they use are ballasted. So the roof membrane is loose laid, and they put these washed rocks, the river rock, that go on there. They are real heavy when they go on, but that is literally holding the roof membrane down. Those roughly are good for about maybe 10 years or so. I have some information at the bottom of this slide talking about some of the thickness. They talk about how thick they are, and they'll do it in terms of how many, quote, mils it is. Whenever you see it like that, it's how many fractions of an inch. It's 1/1000th of an inch. Many of these are just large sheets, and they unroll them and then seam them in place. And the rubber, if they're using that for the sheets, is typically EPDM. Very highly weather resistant. It's actually a synthetic polymer that they use. Great for large roofs, goes down easily. But the big problems with it are where it gets cut and torn very easily, and seams will pull apart. When they put it down, they usually do it on top of the insulation. So you have these insulation boards, rigid board insulation, and you see kind of all the white specks in the kind of the background here. Well, those are holding all these boards down. And then if they're doing a loose laid system, they'll lay it over top of this and then pour the ballast on top, the river rock. Big, big wheelbarrows full of these rocks. And all it is rolled out just like you see right here. It's almost that simple. On some of these single ply membranes, however, if you look at the edge of it, you see where the seam is. The seams are very likely either torched down, or they use these special welders to do it. If you ever have the opportunity, I would encourage you to go to a trade show, whether it's the Home Builders, Carlisle Roofing in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, has that's where they're headquartered. They used to have I believe like a 2-day seminar that they would put on. I never had the opportunity to go to it. I know a bunch of guys who did, and it was a great learning experience. It's hands-on, wonderful information that they would give you. But I have gone to some of these in other places, and the heat welding machines, when they use these, once the seams go together, if you can kind of see my fingers overlapping, once these things go together, it's welded together in such a fashion that the strongest one of you, I would tell you, try to pull the seams apart. It's not going to happen. It's permanent. This, however, is one of the things that you want to be looking for. You can see where the coating on here is worn. This is uneven. Something was on there to make it look like this, but this is a roof that's showing signs of aging. One of the things that can be done for this kind of roof to help prolong the life of it a little bit is to do what's called silver coating. So there's a special type of coating material. They have ones that are silver, they have some that are white. And you basically, it's the best way to describe it to you, it's like painting the roof. And that will help prolong it for a period of time. I have this on my building here, on my office. To say this is not my roof, but it's the same type of thing. And I wanted to prolong the life of it. So I silver coated it or white coated. EPDM is what I was talking about before. They're anchored using one of a couple of different methods. Either ballasted with the same river stone that I talked about, keep the roof from blowing off. And the membrane is just laid over these non-anchored insulation boards. Then they cover it. And look at the weight of these things, about 10 pounds per square foot. That's a lot. The idea with the ballast is to help shield the membrane from the weather, extend the life of the roof, and help retard some of the ultraviolet light. Now, if anybody wants to type anything into the chat, because we're not doing open mics here, I guess, tell me, anybody see anything wrong with this? Or is this okay? So I'll give you a moment to maybe put something in. This is why I like doing live presentations, so you get somebody speaking back. But if you haven't picked up on it, look at all the open seams here.
Looks like they're chasing a leak.
Yeah, I think that was part of the intent, but it was left this way. That's the big problem. Now, remember I talked before about having these walkways? Look at the stone pavers that are over towards the upper right corner. That's really the area, the only area that you really ought to be walking on. But yes, I do believe somebody was trying to chase a leak. Whether they fixed it or not, I don't believe they had. But they left it this way. They never went back, never pushed the stone back in place. You also have mechanically attached. That's where you have the plates of the fasteners that I mentioned before. If you're in a high wind area, that would be the type of thing to use. I thought I saw somebody earlier tonight was talking about, I think they're here from maybe Chicago or somewhere like that. The kind of winds that you get, especially coming in off the lakes, I would tell you, yes, that would be the type. I would be looking more for mechanically attached in those areas. And this is it. This is what you're seeing, is somebody putting these in place. Then they roll it out. If you see those plates, kind of the outline of the plates through the membrane, that's a problem. You also have fully adhered. They use an adhesive to hold that down. Either a high elevation area, maybe hurricane prone, where you've got a lot of wind uplift. I would tell you, knowing where Kenny is, right along the ocean, I'm about 45 minutes inland from the ocean, but Kenny is right on the ocean. And in his area, he's more subject, not to the high elevation, of course, but more prone to some of the wind and uplift problems. So again, just kind of get a feel for whatever area that you're in as to maybe what the best method of attachment would be. The other thing that you want to look for, this is a cutaway, but the other thing, and I'll show you a couple more slides of this in a moment, on the outside edges, they have these gravel stops. And that's what you're looking at. It's a metal flashing. And ideally, those gravel stops should have slits in it so that if there is any kind of water that gets on here, the slits are openings, kind of like weep holes, and it allows the water to drain right off the roof. Stop and think about the logic for a moment. If I have this metal going all the way around without any means of draining the water, I have created a damming effect, and now I have a pool on top of the roof. That's a tremendous amount of weight, potential weight, sitting on these roofs. You have other types, thermoplastics that are weldable, TPO, and PVC is really no longer used, by the way. Everybody knows what PVC is. Well, in the early days when they were using it, they found in an area such as where I'm from, because we do get cold weather here, PVC is very brittle. So it's also not a roof that you should be walking on. TPO is it's tripolymer olefins, but that's what they've switched over to now. And the sheets that I was talking about are reinforced, and the seams are heat welded together. It's fusing the sheets together. Great systems for large roofs. They are fairly puncture resistant, good resistance to a lot of chemicals. They are slippery though, so just be aware of that if you ever have to walk one. Here again is a cutaway. The gravel stop is on there, but this is showing a TPO roof, and you'll see the overlapping seam right here. This is the welder, the heat welder that I was talking about. There's different brands, of course, but this is just to give you an idea of the way they do it. So here's mechanically fastened with PVC. As I mentioned to you before, they really don't use PVC any longer. But they do look alike. PVC and TPO, from an outward appearance, do look very, very similar. You have metal roofs that are used for low slope roofing. They're either architectural or structural. Architectural ones need to be supported on some kind of a continuous deck. Structural systems can be put right on top of the metal supports. The structural ones are usually watertight systems, and they can go down to extremely low slope, almost a flat, well, 1/4 inch and 12, that's definitely considered a flat roof system. Architectural systems do need to have some drainage. So typically speaking, no less than 2 and 12. Most popular type of metal for some of these is the galvanized steel. They have some others, more for the architectural. Many of you have probably seen, even on residential, you've probably seen copper roofs. It's pretty much the same thing. And from an architectural standpoint, where the roof is visible, less than about 200 feet wide, that's where they're going to use the architectural type systems. Looks like this. For those of you in the cold weather states, you'll recognize the snow guards that are on here, or the ice guards. For those of you in warm weather states, you probably don't have these, probably won't encounter them. The general idea was if the snow built up or you get an ice buildup, once it starts to melt, these things break it up as it slides down the roof, so nobody gets hurt down below. That's kind of the simple way of explaining it. Switching gears just for a moment. When we talk about asphalt shingles, yes, you'll find those on commercial buildings. They may be used alone or probably more likely in combination with other systems like you see here. The transition points are the most critical. Now, just to back up for a brief moment, anybody know with asphalt roofing, what is the lowest you're allowed to go? Anybody know? Sean, are we getting any answers to that?
312. 312.
Pardon?
312.
Anybody want to guess again?
212.
2.5.
2.5.
412.
Okay, let's make a deal, right? The answer is you're allowed to go down as low as 2 and 12, provided that you have a double underlayment. Without a double underlayment, it's 4 and 12.
2 layers of ice and snow guard.
Essentially, yes. Are we going to peel it up to look to see how many layers, underlayment layers there are? No.
Sure, why not?
Go ahead and peel it up and see how that works afterwards. Different types of insulations that are going to be on there. Polyiso is the big one. Somebody have a question?
I do. You had gone to the decorative metal roofs, and I'm curious if you can tell me what the best practice for the overhang, like at bay windows, where they're using it as a decorative statement roof.
Kind of like this?
That kind of thing, but I'm constantly seeing bay windows where there's no metal overhang, there's no gutter, so I have completely rotted out trim boards on the face of the bay window because there's no overhang.
It's really up to the individual manufacturers on these, but generally speaking, there should be some overhang on there. You don't have the same problem with excessive, well, let me say it a different way. You know how with asphalt shingles, if you have excessive overhang, you run the risk of the shingle breaking. Well, you don't really have that with metal. But you still don't want to have a couple of inches. Good practice, maybe about an inch or so, give or take a little bit. I would tell you that would be best practice. Best practice is also to have drip edge flashing, both along the eaves edge and along the rake edge, both of them. Does that help answer your question? Somebody had, I guess, a raised hand. Is that what I'm looking at?
Alan, do you have a question? No.
No? Let's see. Oh, this was just to give you an idea of some of the different types of insulations or insulation boards that are going to be used. We're not going to see it, but this is just so that you have some idea. And yeah, you do have polystyrenes, just like styrofoam cups of a nature. So yes, they do use those. Generally, you have two different types. You have the open cell, which will allow water to drain through it, and closed cell, which does not allow anything to drain through it. The only way you'd be able to tell is if you were to do a core sample, which of course we're not going to do. Some terminology, when you talk about hydroscopy or hydroscopic, that's the ability to absorb and retain the water. Insulation that has a really high ability to absorb that, like closed cell, that's going to stay wet for a long time. This is just to give you an idea of some of the different types of insulations and their absorbency. So you can see how varied these are. The worst of them is the wood fiber boards that are out there. Common problems. Again, look at the chart that I have here for you. And like anything else, workmanship is always one of the biggest problems. Accounts for almost half of all the problems that you're ever going to see. Foot traffic on a low slope, or especially on a flat roof, can be a problem. You get a maintenance person that goes up there to do something. You probably have roof-mounted HVAC units. So somebody goes up there to do work on those. They're not careful about the roof because that's not what they're there for. They don't consider the problems. Design issues could be a problem, and the list goes on here. Maintenance does account for a lot of problems as well. You ever have the opportunity, you might want to do a search for BERSI. It's the Better Understanding of Roofing Systems Institute. There's some good information on their site, but some of the things that you can look for, some of them are pretty obvious. Look for evidence of ponding water. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Look to see whether or not there's a garden growing on top of the roof. Plant life shouldn't. People throw things up on the roof, broken bottles and rocks and all these other things. Ponding water, you have two definitions that you should be aware of. Ponding water is one, standing water is the other. Ponding water is defined as water that remains on a roof surface 48 hours after a rainfall. Otherwise, it is considered standing water. And standing water is not the problem that ponding water is. Look to see, excuse me, even if you're, well, I don't know about where some of you are from, but I certainly know where I am right now in this mid-Atlantic area. We're almost in a drought. We haven't been defined as one yet, but I don't think we've had any rain in somewhere close to 3 or 4 weeks easily. And when you have something like that, look for evidence of ponding water on a roof. You'll see an outline. If you had a puddle of water and it remained on the roof longer than 48 hours after that rainfall, once it eventually dries, you'll see the outline of it. And that's an indication that you've had ponding water occurring, which means you've got pooling occurring on top of the roof. So even if you're out doing an inspection during a dry spell, or it's, you know, hot and sunny during the day you're out there, but you can see the outline of a water stain, it's worth making a note of that. Remember, I talked to you before about debris being thrown up there. So this was an inspection that I was doing, and you can see even the coping that was on the parapet wall all the way over to the left, and even in the background of the picture, all the broken pieces were up on the roof. Those sharp pieces could cause damage. Another inspection I was doing, perfect evidence of ponding water. All these leaves were blocking the drain on roofs that have parapets. They are actually required by code not only to have low drains, but scuppers further up, secondary drains, so that if a situation like this occurs, you still have an ability to release some amount of the water up there. This, depending on the size of the roof, how much water is on there, you could, in theory, be adding easily a ton or more weight in water weight up on a roof. If I remember from my scouting days, I want to say that a gallon of water is, if I remember, something like 8.3 pounds per gallon of water. Doesn't take much, and it adds up very, very rapidly. Here's another issue. You have these roof-mounted systems, HVAC systems that are up there. And if it's a flat roof, this may not be too bad when it's up on these elevated like this on a, I believe this was either a 6x6 or an 8x8. But when they're up like this on a flat roof, it may not be too much of a problem. When it's on even a low sloped roof, so that you have a pitch to the roof, which way are these supports going? Are they going to retain snow or water, or are they positioned so that they are running parallel, not perpendicular, to the roof slope? The internal roof drains like this are notorious for creating problems. First of
5
all,
minutes, Dave. 5 minutes.
Oh, all right, thank you. I'll try to run through some quick pictures with you just to give you some idea of things. But if you look at this, you'll see where the membrane is actually pulled away from this drain. And now the drain is elevated above the roof. It was elevated to begin with. So until you have an abundance of water on this roof, it's not going to drain, it's going to hold the water. Same thing here. This was supposed to be a pitch pad or a pitch pocket, and it deteriorated. So I'll just hit you with some more pictures here real fast, because we only have the few minutes. This is typical of a built-up roof. you get the scaling or the alligatoring, and it's pulling apart. It's like fissures and crevices that are in there. Same thing here, but on top of that, you see the boot prints. Somebody walked on this when it was hot. Sean, if you would, I think, or Mark Laudner.
Yeah, on those previous slides with the gravel instead of the washed river stone. Go back before that one. What kind of a roof system is that has that? Or is
Say that again, please.
Previous slide. What kind of roof system is under that? Is that a built-up roof with extra gravel?
Yeah, the chances are that's exactly what this was. Similar
It can't be a single ply with that.
No, I doubt that it was a single ply at all. This is probably a built-up roof.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Sure. Some of the other problems, look for deterioration of the felts. Oh, let me do this, because I know we're just about out of time. One of the, and I'll show you a very quick series of pictures here where you have a horizontal transitioning to any kind of vertical, in other words, like a parapet. The roof membrane should never be installed at a 90-degree angle. They should have a piece of trim in there, and you'll see it towards the very bottom of this. It's called a cant strip. So it's sometimes a piece of wood or something like that that's cut at a 45-degree angle. So you get this gradual transition. If you have a perfect 90-degree corner there, the membrane will tear. It doesn't take much for that. And look at the top of this where it's adhered. There should be some kind of a termination bar or something on there that holds it in place. So here's an example where it clearly has pulled away, causing all sorts of leakage. These are just pictures very quickly here of nothing but problems. Long deteriorated. This is a built-up roof, or excuse me, not built up. This is a single-ply membrane that's on here, and it's weathered and aged so that it's just almost not even there. Parts of it have fallen off and weathered drastically. No cant strip. When they went from the horizontal to the vertical, this is where it has the ability to tear off pretty easily. Excuse me. Look at the openings and the coping for drainage. That's what this is.
Hey, Dave,
Yes.
I got a question for you. Do all these EPDM roofs shrink with age to pull away and show those washers?
As they age, yes, I've seen that happen. So as it starts getting quite a bit older, it can happen. If you see it on a relatively newer roof, I would tell you it's an improper or poorly done installation. So I know we are just about out of time, but one of the last things that I do want to show you very, very quickly, if I may, take a look at the seams. You might want to take something up there to see if they pull apart. There should be a bleed out, about a 1/4 inch bleed out. The other thing that I do want to show you here on any kind of repairs that are done. Oops, wrong picture. Here we go. Any patches should never have a 90-degree corner. They should all be rounded, such as what you see here. So if you see a 90-degree corner on a patch, it's not a professional job. I do have lots more. I know we're about out of time here. Hollis, I am showing basically 9:50 on the dot here for you.